Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to focus on the second English colony in the 13th colony list, Massachusetts, and make a theory about Plymouth and the Pilgrims. I hope you like it and enjoy. Massachusetts, what is there not to love? Beautiful landscape, lots of innovations, plenty of landmarks, and a rich history. One of the most famous of all for Massachusetts is Plymouth, the first successful English colony in New England, and the place most American children think of right before they turn their brains off for a week and stuff their faces while their family try to get along in the table. God pray they don't start talking about politics. We all know about the Pilgrims. They sail in 1620 for the sake of religious freedom and land in Plymouth. The Pilgrims were dumb because they don't survive their first winter very well, and Squanto showing up like, "Damn, you guys need our help because seeing you guys doing this bad at surviving is pathetic. I mean, my son can survive better than you and he's 5. I've seen baby sea turtles live longer than you."
Emotional, damn it!
I'm paraphrasing here, but the natives helped them out, and in thanks for their gratitude, made a feast inviting the natives, and they all lived happily ever after. Just don't look up what comes after. But what really happened? Reason to leave Europe and how? The Pilgrims during 1620 were interested to leave Leiden, Holland, as they lived in Holland for more than 10 years now. But for cultural reasons and fear of a new war occurring between Spain and the Dutch to occur the following year as their truce would expire in April 9th, 1621, they were interested to leave for the New World into Virginia as soon as possible. Because Virginia already had a series of settlements by this point, it was an obvious choice for them to avoid the conflicts in Europe and start a new life. But they didn't want it to be settled too close to these settlements, as they fear being persecuted again. They negotiated with the merchant adventurers in the city of London in England to fund their expedition, that funding their return would bring them a great return from the goods they would be able to bring back from Virginia. The expedition had 102 passengers and 30 crew. Out of the 102, only 35 were separatist pilgrims. The Pilgrims sailed from Leiden to Southampton in the Mayflower. Meanwhile, the Speedwell was going to carry the non-pilgrims who were joining the expeditions for other purposes.
Here comes the money, 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 money,
Dollar, dollar, dollar. Ching, ching, bling, bling, cut the chatter. You ain't talking money.
But the Speedwell was having issues and was taking water, and both had to dock on Dartmouth and then Plymouth Harbor, before then having to abandon the Speedwell as it was sinking again. Their original destination was the Hudson River area, which was controlled by the Dutch at the time, but which they got a charter from the Virginia Company, nevertheless. Due to bad weather and rough shores, they landed 200 miles off their destination towards Plymouth instead, which was originally the village named Pawtuxet by the natives, called the Wampanoags. The village was named Plymouth by John Smith, years before the Pilgrims in his 1614 expedition. The majority of the people in the Mayflower weren't even pilgrims, and almost all of them were indentured servants to another company, which is why they were able to resettle in the Virginia colony. Since they were outside the bounds of the legal charter, the strangers wanted to split up and do their own thing. A document was signed by 41 men to make sure they had no intention to leave, which became known as the Mayflower Compact. The compact was basically that they will remain loyal to the king. After this, they go look for food, but because they left in September and arrived in November, they were dangerously short on food, as they wouldn't have time to grow crops. So they took what they could find from the abandoned village of Pawtuxet, which happened to have its people killed due to the great dying that struck New England villages from 1616 to 1619, just 1 year before the Pilgrims arrived. The Pilgrims were having a hard time surviving the winter and died of exposure, dysentery, and scurvy. Out of the 102 colonists, only 57 of them survived, 22 of which were children. They used their dead by dragging them into the forest and propped them up against trees with their muskets so that the Indians would think the colony was well guarded. In the following spring, the Pilgrims are greeted by Samoset, who learned English by Sir Fernando Georges after he bought Samoset from English slave merchant named Thomas Hunt. He was sold off to Spain where he became a slave. Fortunately, he was returned to North America by Sir Fernando's George, who taught him English.
Please give me cock.
Samoset would set a good relationship with the colonist and help bring peaceful relations. After Thanksgiving, they found a large supply of beaver fur in Maine that made Plymouth a profitable colony. It matters so much because it has a massive impact. Because without the Pilgrims or Plymouth, it completely changes the entire idea of the founding myth of America. It also changes the foundation of New England. Without the Pilgrims being the first to land there by accident, would the New England colony be able to survive? And what type of people would settle this new area instead, aside from the natives? The reason I ask this was because England wasn't the only group near the area. The French already had a presence close by, as they'd been in this region for a century longer than the English were starting expeditions as early as 1524. They already had control of lands surrounding the St. Lawrence River and much of Newfoundland as well as Acadia and Nova Scotia, and are already close to Maine. There has even been a failed expedition in 1604 by Pierre Duguay, who came along with 79 men to help establish a colony in St. Croix Island in Maine, with interest of expanding west to increase trade for beaver pelts. This is simply to bring up how close the French were in this area, and if things came up different, would completely change the fabric of New England. Let's say the Pilgrims made to the Hudson River instead of landing into Plymouth. If the Pilgrims made it to their original destination and made money there for the merchant adventures, it completely changes everything. The chances of a colony being set up in New England is not likely going to occur during the 1620s. The reason is that the natives were all killed off during the 1616 to 1619 Great Dying. Without them, any explorers would have a harder time finding beavers, especially for an area that isn't as well mapped out north of Cape Cod. The second reason is that the merchant adventurers sold their share to the Pilgrims for £1,800 since they always had difficulty making enough money, and the Pilgrims as a result were under immense debt. The beaver trade skyrocketed due to the Anglo-French War in 1627-1629, as the English high society weren't able to get beaver fur, which the French had a high supply of. This incentivized them to find beavers, which they found in Maine in our timeline. But during the 1600s, beavers were also quite plentiful in the Hudson River Valley as well. For this reason, if they made it and found beavers in the Hudson Bay River Valley, they have no reason to venture into New England, never mind Maine. In 1629, King Charles I dissolves Parliament, and that means the Puritans' leaders lose their representation, starting the Great Migration that lasts all the way in 1640. The Massachusetts Bay Colony is set during this time in 1629. In 1630, they get a charter to settle New England. However, if the Pilgrims never land in Plymouth and instead go to their intended destination, the Massachusetts Bay Colony is likely to settle near the Connecticut River. As this is something they did in the 1640s, it will just occur a decade earlier, with the 1630s more concentrated in southern New England. This change of events has a massive precedent over the faith of New England, as, without the Pilgrims' initial landing in Plymouth and the wave of Puritans who came in the following decades to the region, it means that much of modern-day New England isn't colonized by the English, with much of Vermont, New Hampshire, and all of Maine isn't colonized by the English for the next 2 or 3 decades, as colonizing New England is delayed and shifts south. This leaves more breathing room for future French colonists to settle in modern-day Maine and northern New Hampshire due to Maine's large supply of beavers and the Merrimack River serving as a border and a good source for trade with the natives in New England, and having control of the northern Connecticut River through forts and outposts allows the French to both be able to trade and limit the English expansion up north. By the time the English redirect north, it's too late with France having a claim. The English are likely to go to fight for it back, and it could change what land is given to them. New York is annexed a decade earlier. The first Anglo-Dutch Wars would still occur in 1652, due to rising tensions between the English and the Dutch, thanks to laws like the Navigation Act of 1651, which restricted trade of its colonies to exclusively trade with the English homeland. The war lasted until 1654. They got their supremacy against the Dutch, with the Navigations Act in effect and striking of the flags to English ships in the Narrow Sea, or aka the British Channel. However, they wouldn't take New Amsterdam until 1664. The Second Anglo-Dutch War started in 1665, and New York wasn't fully theirs until the Treaty of Breda in 1667, that the English consolidated the land with the Dutch, recognizing their control of New York. However, the reason why this was important is that in this new alternative world, tensions would flare between the Puritans and the Dutch, as they would very likely like to expand to the more fertile territory to the west of Connecticut into the Hudson Bay River Valley. With a less spread-out population and closer proximity to the Hudson River, it's very likely that England would see an opportunity to take the colony for themselves and annex it in 1654 rather than 1664 and merge it with the New England colony. It's very likely Maine, New Hampshire, and northern Vermont is going to be handed over to the English, as France isn't able to maintain its colonies due to their lack of population and industries. But it will be decades later, and the borders could be drawn completely different, which will then be inherited by the states during the Revolutionary War later on. There will likely going to have a larger French presence in the region compared to our timeline, and a stronger French feeling similar to Louisiana with a large French-American presence. New England will simply not be the same in this alternative timeline. The biggest problem is that without Plymouth, the founding myth completely changes in America, with a new one needing to take its place. Perhaps Jamestown becomes its founding, but it's unlikely, as Jamestown was founded for profit-driven motives, which a lot of Americans later on don't like. It's more likely that wherever the Puritans set up its first city, most likely Boston, in New England, that will become the symbol of freedom in the Northeast and later become an American myth. Thanks, everyone. I hope you guys like it and subscribe. Please comment on what I missed and what I got wrong. Links to my sources and timestamps in the description. Thank you very much. Out.